Hi, it's Courtney Rao Rogers responding to the movie Hungry for Profit and then the podcasts from Radiolab and on Wilden. So speaking about Hungry for Profit and agribusiness and undocumented labor and its impact on global hunger, I actually would really be curious to see a more recent take on this and how there's been another movement for, organic small trade farming and produce and commodities. Is it illuminating the abuses of big farming and livestock that were presented in that video from the 80s? And also, just as a sidebar, I was super frustrated by the caption saying, speaking in a foreign language. It's not hard to actually identify the languages spoken in the Philippines and Brazil. Going back to the content of the video, though, the large-scale production of export crops sort of forces hunger, as people native to the country aren't able to grow their own crops because their land is either taken by the multinationals or they just don't have the time to do their own subsistence farming. And then, those import crops, it certainly builds a country's GDP, but it drives hunger up in the poor populations who actually do the farming on that land. And then this just cacophony of smug white voices happily narrating the destruction of traditional farm structures was just really offensive to watch. But it's nearly impossible, even today, to feed ourselves without being complicit in this large-scale agribusiness, and as multinationals like Dole and Del Monte and Unilever in particular, which didn't exist when this film was made, but owns like a third of what we buy in a grocery store. We're forced into complicity with exploited immigrant labor and migrant families that travel from state to state in the U.S. that follow the crops being harvested. And their hunger increases because they're losing means to produce their own food. And that was the most dramatic statement for me in the whole film. Like, hunger increases because people are losing the means to produce their own food by big multinational corporations buying up all the land for export farming. And then it forces people to abandon that land and their own subsistence farming in search of work and in search of food. And then all those executives that they were interviewing, it sort of reminded me of those scenes in The Godfather 2 with Hyman Roth and Michael Corleone trying to get a foreign government to essentially bankroll and launder their money in Cuba by investing in the tourism there. It was just reeking of that movie. The two podcasts were interested in how Ben Frank in Busted sort of planted that, like, driving yourself out of poverty and picking yourself out of your bootstraps myth of American exceptionalism, that self-made man load of crap, because it ignores all of the cultural and environmental context of poverty. As his sister wrote to him, some impediments are just too hard to break through, and that remains so. Particularly when you look at the legacy of slavery in this country and white power and what that has inflicted on black and brown populations, it just proves that our entire way of being as a country is rooted in hegemony and the imposition of dominant group ideology on everyone in society. That that unattainable goal is baked into how we do things. And then Wilden had this similar reason of going to America as Enrique from Enrique's journey, and although his physical journey was easier, it sort of ended up in the same place, trying to, like, feed himself into a dominant culture and go to school and just pretend to be like everybody else. And then he gets picked up by ICE and threatened with deportation, and he's detained for months. But then he had support because he had gone to school and was able to get representation to stay. Lastly, it thinks about the concept of the panopticon and how the panopticon creates strategic darkness and blindness to the people who are within it. And I think, schools and businesses and large-scale exporting of goods and services is designed to keep us ignorant of other people's suffering or other people's advantage over us. It's structured only to allow you to see what's directly in front of you in your small section of the panopticon. Schools in particular work for schools for kids who schools were designed to work for, which when schools were first started, it was dominant power holders and landowners' children's. And now it's still, schools are pushing back on this, but schools are still designed to work for a white baseline. And everyone else is sort of scrambling to catch up, and it's sort of just baked into the system that they never can. So the pushback on schools that try to evade this type of surveillance from the Panopticon and provide light and opportunity to all of the students is so great that many give up. So all of these resources this week were a really fascinating look into how we are designed to squash little people and people we deem little people, and it's not okay. And we need people in office and in government to shine the light on everything, not just keeping us all in those strategic areas of darkness and blindness. Thanks.